In this video, we're going to talk about calculating AP quantities from recipe quantities. So here we have an ingredient in a recipe, acorn squash cubed, but the recipe quantity is 6 quarts, and the AP quantity is listed in pounds. That means we're expecting to buy it by the pound. So we've got to get between 6 quarts EP and pounds AP. So to do that, we're going to do this revised recipe quantity, which is also an EP number, but is just in the AP units. So it's going to be an EP number, but it's going to be in pounds because our AP quantity is pounds. So when you see revised recipe quantity in this book, that's what we're talking about. EP quantity in AP units. So the first thing we got to do is get between quarts and pounds, and they've given us the book of yields information here. So it says 1 cup is 4 ounces. So the first thing I've got to do is get my 6 quarts into cups so that I can use that book of yields information. So I just do that in the standard old way that we've been doing all along. So 6 quarts EP is 24 cups EP. Now I can use the book of yields information they gave us of 1 cup is 4.6 ounces. So those are both EP numbers. So I've made my 24 cups EP into 110.4 ounces EP. And then I just use the standard method for making that ounces EP into pounds EP. So now I've got the revised recipe quantity of 6.9 pounds EP. And so now I'm going to use our yield percent out of the book of yields and transfer that pounds EP into pounds AP. So 9.1 pounds AP is what we end up with when we apply the yield percent. So we can sometimes go straight from recipe quantity to AP quantity. Here's an example of when we want to do that particularly, because here we have celery small dice. We start out with 12 ounce recipe quantity, and the AP quantity is in bunch. And so if we did the revised recipe quantity, we'd have an EP bunch, which doesn't make any sense because remember the recipe quantity and the revised recipe quantity are both EP. And to me, at least, EP bunch has no meaning. So we'll skip that step of going into that intermediary and we'll just go directly from the EP quantity over to the AP quantity. So if we look at our book of yields for diced celery, we can see we have a column here that says there's 22 trimmed clean ounces per AP unit. So that means 22 EP ounces per AP unit, which is a bunch. So 22 EP ounces per AP bunch. So we use that to take our 12 ounces EP from the recipe, multiplied by our conversion factor, which we get from here. So this is 1 bunch AP per 22 ounces EP. And I end up with 0.545 bunches AP. So you may look at that and say, well, this is a crazy number. I mean, you're not going to go to the store and buy 0.545 bunches AP of celery or order that from your vendor. But the reason we use numbers like that is later on when we're doing costing, it it makes some sense in some of the, when they're costing out a recipe to cost out the part of that bunch of celery that we use in this recipe. And then you may use the rest of it in something else, but we want to know what was the cost of the celery that went into this recipe. So that's why a number like that can make sense, even though on the face of it, it seems kind of like a silly number. So if you're more comfortable with yield percent, you can do that same calculation using yield percent too. So remember, we're making our 12 ounces of celery over into bunches of AP. So we can use our yield percent to go from our recipe quantity of 12 ounces EP, use the 68.8% yield from the Book of Yields, and make that into ounces AP. And then to make that into bunches, we look over here on this part of the Book of Yields, and it says that one AP bunch is 32 ounces AP. So we use the conversion factor, one bunch of AP over 32 ounces AP. And we take our 17.4 ounces AP and we come up with 0.54 bunches AP. You might notice that was slightly different from the way we came up. The other way we did it, we came up with 0.545 bunches AP, and that's because there's a different rounding in some of the different Book of Yields numbers, and so when you round numbers, you create small errors, rounding errors. So don't worry about that.